No doubt the founders would not have needed Ben Franklin's invention of bifocals to see the contrast and irony in the towering insult of the very existence of this federal agency. And now one has to wonder, how does one respond to news that the Trump administration is intent on cutting nearly in half the tax parasites working inside the Small Business Administration?
The clear case of fraud was with the Small Business Administration, where they were handing out loans, $330 million worth of loans to people under the age of 11. I think the youngest, Kelly, was a 9-month-old who got a $100,000 loan. That's a very precocious baby we're talking about here.
Hi everyone, I'm Gardner Goldsmith for MRC TV, and here's the story. National Pulse, March 21st, reported that, quote, President Donald J. Trump's push to reduce federal government waste, fraud, and abuse will see the Small Business Administration, SBA, reduce its workforce by over 40%. The impending cuts, which aim to save more than $435 million annually, will impact roughly 6,500 bureaucrats, end quote. Yeah, that's a lot of people working for the Small Business Administration. Now, the Small Business Administration was created by the big government-loving, Constitution-insulting Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1953 with the signing of the Small Business Act. Because, of course, nothing says devotion to small independent market participants than a giant new arm of the U.S. government that'll politicize more and more of the market. Of course. Indeed, littered throughout the legislation, if you look at it, are all sorts of glittering falsehoods and platitudes, such as the claim that the legislation will, as they said at the time, quote, aid, counsel, assist, and protect the interests of small business concerns to preserve free competitive enterprise and to maintain and strengthen the overall economy of our nation, end quote. That's a lot of people. Well, of course, the collectivism is obvious, and the irony is obvious, and has become even more glaring as the SBA has grown like a blood-sucking tick on the hide of the American business beast. Of course, historians can't blame solely Eisenhower and the Congress of that time for this bruise on American liberty. The SBA was preceded by the also unconstitutional, socialist, fascist, Roosevelt-era Reconstruction Finance Corporation, or RFC, and the Eisenhower move might have been viewed as a politically savvy one to portray the opportunistic and bloated government as caring about small business. And thanks, no doubt, to the tendency of government to expand, thanks to the generational normalcy bias of civilians who grow up long after an agency has been created, thus seeing them assume its validity and not question its unconstitutional nature, and thanks to the rent-seeking feedback loop that entices special interests to promote politicians who will prod bureaucracies to hand benefits such as subsidies or protection against foreign competition to those interests, and thanks to what in some cases becomes a revolving door between businesses and the agencies, the Wall Street Journal notes that this small business bureaucracy isn't very small. Quote, the extensive workforce reduction and restructuring will take the SBA, an agency with more than 6,500 employees, back to pre-pandemic staffing levels by eliminating around 2,700 positions. The cuts will affect non-essential roles at the agency and include voluntary resignations and the expiration of appointments made during the COVID-19 pandemic, the people said, end quote. In any context, the term non-essential is, of course, subjective. And what is deemed essential work only can be defined by individuals expressing their preferences in a free market. But within the constitutional context, no aspect of the Small Business Administration is allowed unless the Constitution is amended. Perhaps Mr. Trump could acknowledge that fact and go a little further in the SBA cuts and eliminate the entire swampy sponge. And with all due respect to the Wall Street Journal, this speaker and writer of the article for MRCTV here would be remiss if I did not mention two facts about the purported pandemic. First, no one can say whether the COVID-19 phenomenon was a pandemic because in 2009, the World Health Organization, WHO, changed the definition of the word to focus on prevalence of a virus rather than lethality, allowing the term to be improperly applied to outbreaks that might be less deadly than permitted under the previous standard for the term. Second, the U.S. government literally paid medical establishments to report as deaths from COVID many deaths that never could be proven to have been caused by COVID. None other than coronavirus vixen Deborah Birx admitted this in April of 2020.
So I think in this country, we've taken a very liberal approach to mortality. And I think the reporting here has been pretty straightforward over the last 5 to 6 weeks. Right now, we're still recording it, and the great thing about having forms that come in and a form that has the ability to mark it as COVID-19 infection, the intent is right now that if someone dies with COVID-19, we are counting that as a COVID-19 death.
But as the Wall Street Journal reports, the SBA fed off the massive COVID response in 2020 that saw huge federal subsidies of businesses in what President Trump and his Democrat and Republican allies called the PPP loans. Yes, they were packed inside the $2 trillion CARES Act that was passed in April of 2020. Yet now the Trump administration is pushing its reform rhetoric really hard. Perhaps they've learned from previous mistakes, but of course the lack of any apology seems pretty darn glaring. Quote, SBA Administrator Kelly Loeffler said in a video posted on social media on Friday that the agency is done wasting millions of tax dollars and that the Trump administration will right-size the agency to transform the SBA into a high-efficiency engine for America's entrepreneurs and taxpayers. End quote.
The SBA is getting back to work. It needs to get back to our founding mission of empowering America's job creators. This agency is done wasting millions of tax dollars to fund a progressive pandemic-era bureaucracy. We will not allow fiscal mismanagement to threaten our loan programs or criminals to get away with fraud. But we will evaluate every program and expenditure, and we will right-size the agency to transform the SBA into a high-efficiency engine for America's entrepreneurs and taxpayers.
You know, it's not her place or Mr. Trump's place to transform the SBA into anything other than a former federal agency. Not only is it unconstitutional, it warps and redirects what should be market decisions made by free individuals who ought to assess investment opportunities and invest or avoid a venture based on their own free will. Fascism and mercantilism aren't supposed to be part of the market environment in the United States, and in every nation where they've been tried, they led to disaster. But FDR, well, he adored collectivism, and Eisenhower didn't break from that political path when they started the SBA. Thus, the Wall Street Journal notes that the SBA, quote, runs loan programs to provide small companies with capital, helps small businesses win federal contracts, and funds local centers where entrepreneurs receive counseling, technical assistance, and other support. End quote. This is fantasy land. Such decisions are supposed to be left up to civilians, risking our own capital, not bureaucrats throwing around our money. Yeah, let's see the government made more efficient. That's great, absolutely. But focusing on so-called efficiency misses the fact that if the president, Congress, the judiciary, and the bureaucracy abided by the Constitution, the bureaucracy would necessarily be a lot smaller. And we'd be a lot freer. Hey, thanks for watching, everyone. Please like and subscribe and follow us on Rumble, where they don't censor us. Share the videos far and wide, especially to students on economics, history, ethics. Maybe they'll find something pretty valuable here. Check us out at, of course, YouTube, where sometimes they are censorious. And you can always find us all the time inside Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok, and please visit MRCTV.org. That's MRCTV.org to find out what the whole team is doing. And please consider contributing to the Media Research Center and check out the store while you're there. You can, of course, find us over on X, and if you want to find me on Gab, I'm at Gardner Goldsmith on Gab, and on X, I'm at Gard Goldsmith. For MRC TV, thanks for watching. Share the videos. I'm Gardner Goldsmith.